Happy Monday and welcome to another CEO conversation with me, Data Hayesburg, also known as the Vision Builder. And this month, it's Women's Founders Month. And I actually learned this from my publicist, Carla Williams Johnson. And I felt, you know what, why not focus this month's CEO conversations on issues relating to women in leadership and women in business. So that's what we're going to be sharing and discussing and chatting about today in our CEO conversation. I actually want to speak about women in leadership and, generally speaking, some of the issues that we face as female leaders that may not necessarily apply to our male counterparts. Now, in the Caribbean, I don't know what your perspective is, but I've found that in a number of the firms that I've observed or worked with, that women tend to have a pretty predominant role in the leadership space. Now, does it necessarily mean they're the CEOs? Not necessarily. We are still working in that space and in that realm for more women to step into the CEO space of companies. However, I do know that for most of my career, particularly when I was in the corporate space working for someone else, a lot of my managers and executive managers were female. Now, what does that actually mean, being a woman in a leadership role? What does it mean for life balance or harmony? What does it mean for your career prospects? What are the real things that you have to think about that, again, our male counterparts may not necessarily have to think about on the same level as us? So, welcome to the conversation. Please feel free to join in the chat. Your thoughts, share your experiences as a female executive or female woman in business. And I'm willing to share mine as well. Now, just a background. I started my business over 8 years ago. At that point in time, and let me explain the reason that I got into business. At that point in time, I was already advancing in my career. I had operated as a supervisory level for quite a few years, and I was now acting at a management level at my company. So at that company, the public relations officer was a management position, and I was operating at that position. I had not too long gotten married. And when I looked around at the space, as I said, in that company, a lot of the people that I worked for, managers, senior managers, executive managers, were female. And I remember looking around in that company, and I felt that there were certain things that I observed in that environment that gave me a lot of pause as somebody who was young, about to start a family. And one of those things is looking on at my colleagues juggling, trying to advance in their career while doing what they needed to do as a mom or as a wife, and oftentimes having a real hard balance and struggle in that area and in that space. I don't know if any of you all who are looking on can attest to that, right? And I remember looking at persons fight for vacation time to spend time with their kids, looking at persons having to come to ask for time off because their child is sick, and honestly getting a really hard time from managers who were also female to get that time off. And it was just like a myriad of woes, really, in that space, not to mention a lot of other issues relating to female health and even trying to have a child. And this is on the heels of Mother's Day, which was yesterday, right? And I looked on at that as someone who, looking at my career trajectory, I was also on that path. It was very disturbing for me. And I felt that, one, there had to be a greater level of compassion for women from other women leaders. And two, when I looked at the trajectory of my life and progressing in this career space, working for someone else, I felt that that I didn't see for myself the vision that I wanted in terms of the quality of life, the time flexibility, and that sort of thing. And I would always say that that is what I saw for me, not necessarily for anyone else, because there are a number of women, many of you who are looking on right now, who are rock stars, who were able to handle the juggling and just making those compromises. But for me, I knew that it really wasn't something that I was willing to do, to compromise on. And that really inspired me to get back to my original vision and to start my business while I was still employed, and then eventually to transition out of that formal corporate working space, working for someone else, to finally working for myself. And for me personally, I have not regretted that decision. But does it mean that as a mom now, I'm still married, I am a mom of 2 children, that I don't presently have challenges because of the various hats that I wear? Of course not. I think that intrinsically, there are challenges that accompany us as women that we now have to help shape and create a workspace that really enables us to function well. One of the things that I noted in the pandemic is that things that in the Caribbean we claimed was not possible for years and years suddenly became possible. Suddenly we were able to use remote work. Suddenly we were able to decentralize our operations, and people were able to operate from different spaces rather than having to come to one centralized location. Suddenly, these realities were now available to us. Suddenly, it became okay to know that a mom would be working or a dad would be working and that a kid might pop up in the midst of a meeting. These things became understood, became accepted. And in that regard, as much as the pandemic was challenging, the pandemic was scary, it brought a certain level of advancement to our working space that we did not have before. What is sad to me is that now that we are in the endemic stage, I'm seeing so many leaders making choices, strategic choices to revert to an old system that ultimately will negatively impact the quality of life of your team, the quality of life of mothers, the quality of life of your female leaders who are now back into having to drop their kids to school, and still having to perform on the job and still having to do all of those, wear all of those other hats. So my question now is, what does it mean for us as CEOs to become far more progressive and understanding as it relates to our women who are working within our organizations, our women in leadership, our women in business? What is it that we now need to consider that we haven't considered before? I think that we are too hasty to return to the way things used to be. What are some of the markers that we need to actually look at now that we are on this side of the equation and have had 2 years of a particular type of experience? What are some of the things that we now need to look at? Because we now have evidence that we did not have before. What are some of the things that we should be looking at? Well, firstly, I would say that from the perspective of looking at women within your organization, and again, I'm not dismissing the men, but from the perspective of looking at women within your organization, I think that it's important for us to recognize that flexibility, decentralized workspace is not synonymous with reduced productivity. That's the first thing. It is not synonymous with reduced productivity. In fact, I want to put forward that the fact that persons were working from home, you actually got more out of your team members and your women employees than you would have gotten before. Because now they're working from home. Now, there was that blurring of the line. So while the hours were not standard necessarily from 8 to 4, you may have gotten, if you were to count the hours of work that they put in, you may have gotten far more from your staff. Okay? So there is that. Why are we returning to exactly the old system that puts so much limits on your team members? Why would you return to having persons being 3 hours of traffic to and from work? Do you think that those 3 hours of traffic are actually giving you more energy from your staff or less energy from your staff? Okay? The second thing is, now that we have come out of the pandemic, there were some preconceived notions about women, about the way that women work, about the ability of women to perform at high levels based on their marital status, them having children or not. There were some preconceived notions that fundamentally influenced the way that a woman was evaluated to operate in a particular space or place. I recall this one time, and I'm not going to give the details of this. There was this one time that I was being interviewed for a particular post in a particular position, and the woman who was on the panel asked me this: do you think you can fulfill the requirements of this job being a wife and a mother of 2 young children? That was the question. You know what was astounding to me is that I am 100% sure that that question was not posed to my male counterparts. So why is it that there's this preconceived notion that because a woman has a child or has children or is married or is a single mother, that she cannot perform in a particular role or a particular function? It is time for us to start re-evaluating these preconceived notions, particularly from persons who are in high levels in the organization or on the boards, or who is supposed to be providing mentorship to women who are coming up in their careers. And you know what's the sad part about it is that a lot of the times the mentors are other women. So there is this idea as well that because it was hard for me coming up, that I can't make it easy for someone else. And that is something that keeps us back. The truth is that in these times, we need more women who are role models. We need more females who are operating in spaces of influence and spaces of leadership, who are willing to demonstrate the way, who are willing to teach, who are willing to empower, because that is the only way that we are actually going to have equality. That's the only way that we are going to be able to create spaces and to break that glass ceiling that we've been talking about since I'm a teenager. Since I'm a teenager, I've been hearing about this glass ceiling. And the truth is, it does exist. And whilst in the Caribbean, we do have more of a matriarchal society and we are seeing so many more women advancing, the truth is there are still disparities. So we actually need more women role models to pave the way for others. So for those of you who are looking on, you're looking on live and you're looking at the replay, here's my question. Do you remember having any female role models in leadership? And what are some of these things that they taught you? I would love for you to share it, because there are many who did not have any female role models. I remember when I just came out of university. It was my first job, and I will never forget the manager that I worked for then. She literally took me under her wing and taught me the ins and outs of her position, the ins and outs of reporting, the ins and outs of looking at data and making strategic decisions. Do you know how influential that was to me for who I am now? A lot of what I do as it relates to strategy is very much influenced by data. I learned the fundamentals of taking my education and applying it to a real business context. That journey starts with that manager. And that's why it's so important to have female role models. I'd also like to say this about women in leadership and women in business, is that if done correctly, we can provide such a unique level of mentorship that can change the space, that can change the culture, that can change the results within an organization. I'm going to say that again. If done correctly, women in leadership, women in business can add a unique level of mentorship, nurturing, and guidance that can fundamentally change your organization's culture, fundamentally change your modus operandi, fundamentally change your results. But we have to, as leaders within organizational spaces, see it as vitally important to create frameworks that mentor, that nurture, that guide persons under a solid mentorship structure. I actually noticed that when it comes to mentorship, when it comes to leadership, a lot of the mentorship for women actually takes place mainly in the spaces of business. So you have mentorship programs for women in business, but I've never really seen a lot of mentorship programs for women in leadership within organizational context, meaning you're not working for your own business. I've noticed that over the years, and that is something that I really feel that we need to have more discussions around, so that things can actually start changing in the direction that we wanted to change. And finally, I'm going to share this, that when it comes to women in leadership, if we create a healthy, positive space for women to truly serve, function, bring their expertise to the table in a genuine way, you can find that workplace policies may adjust in a manner that's more meaningful and gets you better results. See those KPIs that we're looking at and looking for, those KPIs that we report on a weekly, on a monthly or quarterly basis, a yearly basis. Taking more seriously the role of your female members in your leadership team, taking more seriously their role in policy creation and strategic development, can play such a pivotal role in creating evidence-based workplace policies, creating policies for operations, policies for productivity, policies for cash flow, policies for sales, policies for marketing. It can make play such an integral part in the way you reform your policies so that your policies actually speak to the people who are executing them. That's a real thing. So this is really just the beginning of a conversation that I'm hoping we can continue in the chat, and I can bring others in on the conversation to share their own experiences as a woman in leadership or as a woman in business, so that we can finally start having the open, frank discussions about the internal things that women go through in business, as women founders, as women in leadership. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to check your comments, and we resume next Monday at 12 p.m. for CEO Conversations with the Vision Builder.